Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Ready to explore some more cutting-edge research with me?
Always.
All right, today we're diving into the world of AI and ethics. Specifically, how bias can sneak its way into those large language models. You know, the LLMs, the brains behind all those chatbots and text generators we're all using these days.
Yeah, they're everywhere now.
They really are. And we've got some fascinating new research to unpack, fresh from the experts. And get this, they've even come up with a brand new benchmark designed to put these LLMs to the test.
It's pretty groundbreaking stuff.
I'm excited to dig in. But first, why should our listeners even care about bias in AI? What's the big deal?
Well, because AI is increasingly making decisions that affect our lives. Everything from what we see online to potentially even loan approvals or healthcare decisions.
So it's not just about some abstract tech issue. It's about fairness and equity in systems that have real-world impact.
That's exactly it.
And the 2024 Stanford AI Index report shows just how fast this field is growing. They found that the number of new LLMs has actually doubled in just the past year.
Yeah, that's a lot of algorithms making decisions, and that's why understanding bias is more important than ever.
More AI means more potential impact, but also more potential for harm if things go unchecked.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's break down what we even mean by bias in a computer program. It's not like these programs have opinions, right?
Right. It's not about AI having conscious biases. Think of it more like this. AI learns from the massive amounts of data it's trained on. And sometimes that data, well, it reflects existing human prejudices, the kind of biases that we as humans might not even realize we have.
So it's almost like AI is inheriting our bad habits, but on this massive digital scale.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the most shocking examples of this comes from, that experiment with CLIP, the AI model that was supposed to identify objects and images.
Hmm.
It ended up misidentifying Black people as non-human at twice the rate of other races.
Wow, that's disturbing.
It really is, and it highlights why this research is so important. They've developed this new tool called the parity benchmark. It's specifically designed to measure bias in LLMs across a much wider range of categories than ever before.
Okay, so tell me more about this parity benchmark. What makes it so unique?
Well, unlike previous benchmarks that mainly focused on gender and race, this one goes way beyond. They're looking at everything from ageism and ableism to even things like colonial bias, those biases embedded in our historical narratives.
That's a pretty comprehensive approach. I'm impressed. But how do they actually measure these biases? How does the benchmark work?
It's really clever. They came up with two main types of questions. First, there are what they call knowledge-based questions, which are straightforward factual questions designed to assess if the LLM understands the topic at hand. Does it have the basic knowledge?
Yeah, so like a pop quiz for AI.
Exactly, but then they take it a step further with what they call reasoning questions. These are designed to see if the AI can actually apply that knowledge, to make judgments, to draw conclusions. Can it connect the dots, so to speak?
So it's not just about spitting back facts, it's about understanding the nuances.
And what's fascinating is that the research found that the LLMs were actually worse at answering those nuanced reasoning questions compared to the simple knowledge checks.
Really? So even if an AI can give you the textbook definition, it doesn't mean it truly grasps the complexities of bias in real-world situations.
That's a key takeaway here. We can't just assume that AI is unbiased just because it can regurgitate facts. We need to look deeper.
I'm hooked. Tell me, how did the LLMs actually perform on this benchmark? Did any of them pass with flying colors?
Well, they put 6 different models to the test. GPT-4o, Llama 3, Gemma 1.1, and then the Gemini 1.0 Pro, 1.5 Pro, and also Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And, drumroll please, none of them were perfect. Overall accuracy ranged from around 70% to a little over 91%, which, isn't terrible.
Wow.
But here's the thing. Every single model struggled with specific types of bias.
So no AI is getting a gold star just yet.
Nope, not quite. But here's where things get really interesting. The researchers also had a control group of college-educated people take the same benchmark. And guess what?
Did the humans totally crush it?
It was a mixed bag, actually. Sometimes humans outperformed the AI, sometimes they didn't. It really depended on the specific category of bias.
Wow, so even us brainy humans aren't immune to bias. This is getting deep.
It really is, and it shows just how complex this issue is. But now I think it's time to dive into some specific examples from the benchmark. That's where things get really juicy.
Okay, I'm ready to go deeper. Lead the way. Okay, so we've learned that AI can, inherit our biases, and this parity benchmark is really shaking things up. So tell me, What were some of the categories, like where these LLMs really struggled? What tripped them up?
Well, one area that was particularly challenging, for the LLMs was questions related to supremacism and especially white supremacy.
Oh, yeah, supremacism.
Yeah.
I can imagine that being a tough one. Why do you think that was so difficult for the AIs?
Well, it could be a few things. It could be, that the training data just didn't adequately cover those nuances of that ideology, or maybe it's just harder for AI to understand concepts that are so deeply rooted in like historical power dynamics and social context.
It's like you need more than just the facts, right? To really grasp something as complex as supremacism.
Exactly. And this is where those reasoning questions in the benchmark were really important. So, for example, one question presented the LLMs with a scenario um, involving, historical justifications for the Civil War in the U.S. And it asked the LLM to identify, the role of white supremacy in that conflict.
Wow, that's like asking the AI to be a historian and a social commentator all at once.
Right. It's a tall order, and a lot of the models really struggled. It just shows how important it is to train AI not just on like what happened, but the why, the how.
Yeah, it's not enough to teach them dates and names, right? They need to understand the context, the motivations, the whole messy human story behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another category that proved really tough was colonial bias.
Colonial bias, yeah. It's so ingrained in our world, I'm not surprised the AI had a tough time.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and unpacking those biases requires like this deep understanding of history, culture, power structures, all of it. And, one of the knowledge-based questions in the benchmark asked about the idea that, Europeans discovered new lands.
Oh, I see where this is going. It's about whether the AI can, see past that Eurocentric perspective.
Exactly. The benchmark wanted to see if the LLMs could recognize that there were, thriving indigenous civilizations that existed long before colonization, way before. And then the reasoning questions, the LLMs had to analyze how those concepts like manifest destiny, were used to justify expansion and displacement.
Wow, that's heavy stuff. It's like asking the AI to decolonize its own thinking, right?
Exactly. It's a really thought-provoking exercise. So you're probably wondering now, which LLMs did the best. Were there any like overachievers when it came to these tougher categories?
Yeah, spill the tea. Was anyone a rock star?
Well, no model aced everything, right? But we did see some promising signs of progress. Gemini 1.5 Pro, for example, showed significant improvement over its predecessor, in areas like supremacism and colonial bias, almost doubled its accuracy in some cases.
Okay, so it sounds like the developers are at least like trying to make things better, to course correct. That gives me a little bit of hope, right? Like they're taking this seriously.
Yeah, it's definitely encouraging to see. It shows that, bias mitigation is like an active area of research and development, which is important. But there's another category I wanted to touch on because the results were so striking, and that's ageism.
Ageism, oh yeah. The bias that no one wants to admit they have. What did they find out about that one?
Well, it turns out that even those college-educated humans, the ones you might think would be more aware of these biases, actually scored higher than several of the LLMs on the ageism reasoning questions.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me the humans were better at recognizing ageism than some of the AIs? Now that is unexpected.
I know, right? And it suggests that there's something about the human experience, maybe our interactions with older people, that gives us like a different kind of perspective.
Yeah, maybe we're more attuned to those subtle ways ageism plays out in
Yeah.
like everyday life.
Yeah.
Like that example from the benchmark where that teacher wouldn't let the 7-year-old man enroll in a language class, right?
Yeah,
As humans, we just know that's ridiculous.
exactly. It seems AI still has some learning to do when it comes to ageism.
Okay, so we've seen how these AIs can really struggle with like those complex social issues, but were there any categories where they actually did well, where they kind of excelled?
There were a few. One area where many of the LLMs actually performed pretty well, surprisingly, was on the topic of disability and neurodiversity. Like GPT-4o and Claude 3.5 Sonnet, they both demonstrated a strong understanding of the, challenges that individuals with disabilities face.
Really? That's really good to hear. Do you think that's because there's just like more data out there now on disability rights and accessibility?
That's certainly possible. But what's even more encouraging is that, the AI was able to actually apply that knowledge, in those reasoning questions. So, like, for example, one scenario presented to the LLM, it asked, how can schools better support students with disabilities?
And hopefully those AI brainiacs came up with some good
They
ideas.
did. They were able to draw on their knowledge to suggest, practical solutions, things like tailored resources, accommodations, all that. It was impressive. Another category where several LLMs did pretty well was sexism.
Oh, interesting. Maybe all that data on gender equality and the feminist movements, maybe that's helping.
It's a good point. It really highlights how important it is to have those comprehensive and diverse data sets for training these AIs. And again, it wasn't just about spitting back facts.
Mhm.
These LLMs, they were actually able to reason about the consequences of sexism, like the gender pay gap or political underrepresentation.
Wow. So they're not just like identifying the problem, they're actually starting to grasp the real world impact. Okay, I'm sensing a pattern here. The more data we have on a particular bias, the better these AIs seem to do.
That is a really sharp observation. It really does speak to the importance of data diversity and representation in AI development.
Yeah.
But even with a ton of data, we can't just assume the AI is going to, magically become unbiased. We still need these benchmarks, these, rigorous tests to hold these systems accountable.
Right. It's like giving a student a textbook and never actually giving them an exam. How do you know if they've really learned anything, right?
That's such a perfect analogy. And then that's why the parity benchmark is such a, game changer. It's
Yeah.
really raising the bar for what we expect from AI in terms of, ethical awareness.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've seen how AI can stumble where it shows promise and that, even us humans aren't off the hook. So where do we go from here? What does this all mean for like the future of AI?
The million-dollar question. And that's what we're going to unpack in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've spent this whole deep dive exploring this parity benchmark and wow, some really fascinating insights. Some of those LLMs are like making progress,
Yeah.
but some not so much.
Hmm.
And let's not forget, we humans, we've got our own biases to work on. But where do we go from here? What's the next step in this whole AI like evolution?
Well, that's what everyone wants to know, right? And this research actually gives us some really valuable, clues. First and foremost, it just highlights how crucial it is that we're constantly monitoring, evaluating these AI systems. We can't just set them free in the world and hope everything works
It's
out.
like sending your kid off to college. You don't just drop them off and assume they'll like make all the right choices. Like you got to check in. You got to offer guidance, make sure they're on track.
Yeah, exactly. And with AI, that means regularly testing for bias, using tools like this parity benchmark, constantly refining, the data, making sure those algorithms are actually evolving in the right direction. This isn't a one-time thing. This is a constant process.
So AI is kind of in this perpetual beta mode, always learning, always adapting.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And the researchers, they actually had some pretty interesting suggestions for future work. One thing they emphasized was incorporating, different types of data, not just text.
So like images, audio, video,
Hmm.
the whole sensory experience.
Exactly, because bias can manifest in so many ways. Think about facial recognition software, right? There have been so many instances where those systems show bias against certain racial groups.
And that's partly because, those systems, they were mostly trained on images of like white faces, right?
Yeah.
So diversifying that data, it's absolutely crucial.
Hmm.
It's like making sure everyone has a seat at the table.
That's the goal. We need diverse perspectives, diverse experiences to create AI that really reflects how complex our world is. But data is only one part of it. We also need to think about, the human biases that can sneak in when we're designing and developing these systems.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, trying to bake a cake, but you're using spoiled milk. It doesn't matter how fancy you make the decorations, it's not going to taste good. You need good ingredients right from the start.
That's such a great analogy. And one way to do that, is by making sure the teams that are building AI are diverse themselves. Having people from different backgrounds, different lived experiences, that can really help catch those potential biases before they even make it into the tech.
It's like having a team of like different chefs in the kitchen.
Right.
Get a much more interesting, flavorful result.
Exactly. Diversity just brings new ideas, challenges those assumptions, and ultimately leads to more, robust and ethical AI. But it's not just the developers. We as users, we have a responsibility too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We can't just blindly trust every algorithm we come across, right?
Right. We have to think critically, ask those questions like, okay, who created this? What data was it trained on? Are there any hidden biases in here, influencing the output?
Yeah, we've got to be savvy AI consumers, right?
Exactly. And if you see something, say something. Report those instances of bias. Have those conversations. Use your voice. advocate for more ethical AI development. Because remember, this tech is still in those early stages. We're all kind of figuring this out together.
It's like we're all on this like giant AI roller coaster trying to figure out the controls while it's hurtling down the track.
That is a very accurate description, but it's through those collective actions, a shared, commitment to fairness, that's how we shape AI into something that's truly good.
So going back to that question we asked earlier, if AI can absorb our biases, what does that like really say about us? And what's our responsibility, to address those issues, not just in the tech, but within ourselves too?
It's like AI is holding up a mirror, right? It reflects back all of our values, our beliefs, even our blind spots. If we want AI to help make the world more just, more equitable, then we need to start with ourselves.
We have to do the work, the hard work of really like looking at our own biases,
Right.
understanding history, and trying to create a better future for everyone. Because AI, at the end of the day, it's a tool. It's up to us to decide how we use it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a call to action for all of us, right?
Mhm.
Developers, users, policymakers, everyone. This is a conversation that needs to be happening across society.
So, to all of you deep divers out there, keep asking those questions. Keep pushing for AI that's ethical and inclusive. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Yeah.
Until next time.